Welcome again. This is Tony Clark. Thanks for joining this podcast. Tonight, we're going to have a little chat with state final official Nate Kessen. Talk about a few topics here. Nate, just real quick, how long you been officiating?
I just finished my 17th year, Tony.
Great.
17 years. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to having a chat with you this evening.
All right. I just want to just keep this loosey goosey for the guys. I want to talk about stalling. How do you just in general feel stalling in Illinois is progressing as far as the officials calling it?
Yeah, I mean, so when I think of the word progressing, I think of how are we moving forward and really look at how are we getting better, or are we getting better? I think is the key question. There's been continuous rule changes over the last 10 years, and I'm sure beyond that, but I'm going to speak to the last 10 years within wrestling. And, within those rule changes, there have been quite a bit of evolution with stalling. And so I think, each time there are major changes or additions and other rules, sometimes stalling is affected by those rule changes. And I think people are really trying to work hard to get stalling in a good spot to where it's called correctly on a consistent basis. I still feel like we have quite a bit of ways to go to bring the group together, the group of officials, which were, just below about 500 officials in the state of Illinois. So to bring all 500, or, maybe there's 400 that are active, bring all 400, together and get them on the same page, at least as close as possible. So we're making positive strides, but I still feel we have a long way to go.
So over the last couple of years, I know you had mentioned 10, we've added, like in a neutral position, the backing out and the pulling out. Do you think that has helped the officials better define stalling from the neutral position?
Yes and no. I think it's helped define if we go out of bounds, and we go out of bounds because one of these two reasons, that it's an automatic stall call, or in theory it should be an automatic stall call. I think in some ways though it's had officials focus more on going out of bounds versus what's happening between those whistles and who's really pushing the action, who is taking the shots, who is trying to score versus who is trying to defend, that initiate versus react mindset. So I do feel like it's cleared things up to where if we go out of bounds because one wrestler backed off the mat, or we go out of bounds because a wrestler pushed or pulled their opponent out of bounds, then, it's provided clarity there, but maybe it's muddied things a little bit in between those situations.
How do you feel about our stall calls in the advantage and in the defensive position?
So in the defensive position, I feel like there's a lot of onus put on the bottom wrestler to create some action, to really try to get out of that position and get back to their feet or obtain a reversal. And overall, I think it's penalized fairly consistently on the bottom wrestler, on the defensive wrestler. Where I see a little bit of variance is on the top wrestler, on that offensive wrestler in the advantage position on the mat. I'm not a huge fan of calling a lot of stalling on the top wrestler unless they are really latching on and not trying to improve their position, not trying to work for a near fall or fall. Unless the bottom wrestler is really doing all the work and the top wrestler is just hanging on, I think it's a fairly easy call to make. You'll hear a lot of people, whether it's folks in the crowd or maybe coaches from the corner, talking about riding the hips. Really there's nothing in the rule book that speaks to riding the hips and that being a stalling call in the advantage position. So I don't necessarily focus on that as much as I do as, what the wrestler's doing with their hands, with their feet, with their knees, and, even with their head too when you're in the top position. The other piece I want to talk about too from the advantage perspective is when we're on our feet in the rear standing position. I feel like I see us all over the map from an officiating standpoint in the rear standing. And really the rule doesn't say you have to take the wrestler back down to the mat. It says you have to attempt to return the wrestler. So if somebody is lifting, if they're pulling, if they're trying to trip, those are all attempts, and those should not be penalized via a stall call. I think a lot of officials sometimes want to call that offensive wrestler, the person in the rear standing that's behind. They want to make that stall call really fast on them, and I'm not on the same page there. I would rather allow the wrestlers time to improve, allow the wrestler to make some attempts to return, allow the defensive wrestler adequate time to try to escape as well, and make sure I'm looking to see that the defensive wrestler is aggressively trying to escape, and they're not just holding the hands until they get the stall call and then letting the hands go and getting their one. So you got to look out for that as well.
How do you feel about the rule change that better defined fleeing and trying to create that separation between fleeing and stalling?
I'm a big fan of that rule change. Going back to that rear standing position as an example, and say I'm the offensive wrestler and I've got a full lock around the body, around the torso, and we're towards the edge, and I give you a nudge to either push you or I pull you out. You're not really close to scoring there, so I think the stalling call is the better call of the two in that situation, and that rule change provided that clarity in that situation, whereas previously most likely that would have been penalized for pushing the wrestler out of bounds, and fleeing the mat when really I think a stall call is warranted there versus a flee. So I'm a fan of that change, and I think it provided some additional clarity there to where, it doesn't put you in the spot of making a potential match-altering call, when there was a little bit of gray area there before, where now it's fairly clear.
As an IHSA wrestling clinician and as a new member of the IHSA rules interpreters for wrestling, how do you address the officials who would ask the question or make the statement, I don't like to call stalling because I don't want to influence the outcome of the match?
That's a great question. And really it's one that if you're going to mature as an official, and if you truly want to move up the ranks and take on, more challenging assignments, take on, sectional assignments and state final level assignments, you have to become proficient, with calling stalling. It's a big part of folk style wrestling to make sure that the match is progressing forward, and that points are being scored, and that we're progressing throughout the match. And so that's something that you're going to have to get over, and you're going to have to figure out what stalling is and what stalling isn't, and that can be by obtaining that rule knowledge, reading through the rule book and really focusing on Rule 5 and Rule 7, where stalling is addressed quite a bit inside of the rule book, and also following up with the case book and reading those case situations, going to clinics, watching officials who you feel do a nice job of calling stalling, and having discussions with those officials, talking with the coaches too, when time permits, and finding out in their mind, what a good stall call is and what a good stall call isn't. I think all of those things will help you progress, and you'll improve your skills. You'll gain that knowledge and gain that comfort, and it'll come more natural as time goes on. And then you won't, be putting yourself in those situations where you are affecting the outcome of the match. You're just calling the match based on the rules. The kids are determining the outcome. So that's the way I look at that.
Okay, and I know you do some officiating out of state. You do some national tournaments at different levels. How do you think our officials compare with other state or other officials when it comes to stall calls?
That's a great question. I think overall we do a nice job in Illinois as compared to some of the other states. Um, some states, really won't call a lot of stalling if you look at the officials as a whole. I know when I go to Wisconsin to work the Cheesehead, every season in the first week of January, you see a couple different styles up there. I think they do a nice job of calling stalling on the bottom. Um, I don't necessarily agree with all the stall calls I see from the neutral position. There where you have a wrestler shooting in, and we get into scrambles and we end up in a stalemate. I've seen several times where that's been interpreted as creating multiple stalemates on purpose to not progress the match. So I feel like our neutral stalling, we're a little inconsistent when it comes to the out of bounds scenarios, but I don't see a whole lot of what we call mystery calls or kind of just head scratchers. Where a wrestler's trying to score, they're trying to shoot, we're getting caught in stalemates, and they're still getting hit for stalling. That really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But overall, I think we do as good, if not a better job than most of the other states that I've seen collectively. When it comes to stalling, especially in the neutral position, and then on the mat in the bottom position as well.
So if you were to give us a report card grade, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, Illinois officials, let's break it down. How do you think, what our report card be at those of us that are at the state level? What grade would you give us?
At the state level, I'd say we're at a 7.5. I think we're getting it right. Probably 75% of the time. Which it's not good enough. I think you as our head clinician, and several other folks that are rule interpreters and clinicians, realize that, and we're doing the best we can do to bring up all levels, but to really focus, to your point, on that state final official group, which is really 36 individuals every season that are on the mat blowing a whistle during our either individual finals or our dual finals. So I give us a 7.5. Overall. And, I think we got to find a way to close the gap and try to get into that 95th percentile. That should be the goal. 100% really should be the goal, but there's always going to be, 5% of the calls that I think could go either way just based on judgment. So if you take that out, then, your goal should be 95%.
So what would your report card be, for us as a whole, not just the state final officials, but even that middle tier, that sectional or that regional official? Just from what you've seen in your experience across the state this year, what kind of report card would you give us?
When you factor all the officials in, and I think you need to factor in, the experience level and the skill level too, when you're kind of making that grade and weighting that. And, I'd put us somewhere between a 6.5 and a 7. I just think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think stalling could be called a lot more. Earlier on in matches, I was refereeing a sectional final match this year at the Conant sectional, and I made a stall call 27 seconds into the match. We backed right out of bounds. Wrestler B backed right out of bounds. And I warned him for stalling, and coach was 27 seconds into the match, you can't call stalling. Well, why not? If there was 27 seconds left in the match in the third period, I sure as heck would have called it. So I need to call it with 27 seconds into the first period. So I think if really focus on calling stalling more often, then it'll be called more consistently. You won't get those complaints. Thing in the first period, you didn't penalize him there, but then when our guy did it in the third period, you penalized us. What the heck? How are we supposed to wrestle? How are we supposed to coach when we don't know what's coming? So I think earlier on, more consistently, and with more clarity and more confidence, I think we can close the gap and, get the entire team of officials, up into that upper echelon, 85, 90, 95%, when it comes to a grade.
Well, as one of our teachers of our officials, how do you respond to the official that asks you this question? How do they respond to a coach when taken to the table, complaining that their wrestler's taking all the shots? What should their response to that question be?
Yeah, so if somebody asks me that question, hey, to the table and complaining about my stall calls, or my lack of stall calls, I think you number one have to realize that that's a clear questioning judgment situation, and right, wrong, or indifferent. The rule book clearly addresses that as a coach's misconduct. But I think rather than just penalizing the coach right away and saying, "Hey, coach, you're questioning my judgment. Here's your misconduct warning. Go sit back down." I think you can give a 10 or 15-second explanation of what you're seeing and why you're calling what you're calling, or why you're not calling what you're not calling, and give them that quick explanation, and then move forward with the misconduct warning. For questioning the judgment. Stalling is a judgment call, and at the end of the day, unless there was a misapplication of a rule that affected that stall call or that lack of stall call, you would need to assess the misconduct penalty. So I think that would be my response, and really is my response. When I do get asked, because I have been asked that question before. So I think communication is critical there, and then also being consistent and making sure that that you do assess the misconduct if it's warranted.
Same question now. The official comes to you and says, "How do I respond to a coach? His wrestler's on the bottom, and he wants a stall call on the offensive wrestler for riding the hips."
Yeah, so the coach that came to the table, his wrestler is the defensive wrestler, and he wants the top wrestler to be called for stalling, so he takes you to the table during the next charge or during the next timeout.
Yes.
I think it's a similar approach. You have to give a quick explanation of why you're calling or what you're not calling, and then again, that's a clear questioning judgment situation there, and you have to go the misconduct route, because if you don't feel like it is stalling and you haven't made that call, then it's clearly subjective at that point, and it's in somebody's judgment, and you have to penalize. And if the defensive wrestlers has his or her head down, they're not moving their hands, they're not moving their hips or their knees or their feet, not trying to get out or anything like that, you give them that quick explanation, you assess the warning or the penalty, and then you move about your business and get back to the match.
Good. I think those are should be helpful to those that tune into this. Closing remarks. Any topic or any advice that you want to throw out there to officials of all levels?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll stick to the theme here. I know, there's going to be themes with the podcast, and so I want to stick with stalling. And really, I think, the advice or the wisdom that I'll give folks is kind of how I've approached it the last, 16, 17 years since I've been officiating. And that is to continue to develop yourself. That, that self-development piece is huge. We have several learning opportunities available that are offered by the IHSA and the IWCOA here in the state of Illinois. We have our July officials conference where we get together. This year it's going to be in Bloomington, Illinois, and you can sign up for that at on the IHSA.org website. But the IWCOA hosts 12 to 13 officials development clinics every fall. We have rules review sessions in January and February. We've done webinars, mid-season webinars, and a variety of other ways to get educated and to develop yourself. So I think you have to start there. You have to start with the rule book and the case book and all the different video that is available. Whether it's on, the different YouTube channels like yours, the Assigner Guy YouTube channel, IWCOA YouTube channel, and then Illinois Matman has, videos of matches, and watching those matches and watching the calls or the lack of calls, and really trying to connect that to the rule book. And like I said, focusing on Rule 5 and Rule 7 where stalling's addressed within the rule book and the case book. And then talking to your mentor, and talking through situations, especially if you have video of yourself officiating, looking at that video, maybe watching that with your mentor or an official or two that you highly respect, with regards to their abilities to call and not call stalling. I think that's, if you're doing those things, and talking with the coaches to understand, their viewpoint and trying to understand where they're coming from as well. I think you're hitting it from a 360-degree perspective, and really the only thing you can do is improve. But if you're not putting effort into those areas, you're going to limit yourself and your ability to improve with regards to stalling and really in regards to officiating as a whole.
Well, thank you, Nate. That's about the end of our time. I want to thank you for taking time out to do this. And you are right. We do want to put more of these together, covering other topics that we feel that the officials would love to hear. So again, thank you for taking time out of your evening to do this for us.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Tony. Thanks for having me. It's been fun, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.